I just took it out of there nice and easy, didn't crank up the throttle until I was out past the airport, and then ran full tilt until all I could see was waves and rain, a nor'easter bearing down from Greenland, a big, blue, nasty-looking son of a bitch. We had an exposure suit in there, so I pulled it on, then crammed myself back into my Levi's so I wouldn't be so fucking orange. I pointed her north, into the storm clouds, into the waves. Nothing could find me in that. Not cigarettes, not CG cutters, neither helicopters nor satellites. Or so I thought, until the helicopter gunship came up on my stern. I feel like an a-hole guest a lot of the times when I try to work from the road.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I was just out in Bend for a few days, and I definitely have many places I could stay in Bend, and one of them I did the right thing and got way ahead of it and asked this friend like back in August, because I always feel like a shit like asking right on the verge of the trip, because then it's just so clear to the person that you're staying with that like, yeah, sure, I'd like to see you, but this is really more about like having a place to stay. And so I did the right thing and got really far ahead of it this time and talked to my friend Matt and was like, hey, I'm coming out to Bend for the Wilco show in September. Could I crash with you? And he was like, yeah, of course. And then last week he gets COVID and I'm suddenly like sort of thrust back into the situation that I was trying to avoid, which is like, yes, I would like to stay with you, but this is kind of transactional and I'll still be working. And the thing that I'm coming to Bend for doesn't include you.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit tough. Well, I'll be visiting you and I feel like we've already, I think both of us are going to be busy working on other things, but we've carved out some time to visit with one another too. But you and I are similar in that regard too. I feel like we can definitely be like, hey, how's it going? And then 8 hours later be like, hey, how's it going? I had a visitor in February, shout out to Stephen from Overcoat Media from the UK, who was working on an audio documentary. And I had mentioned on Facebook at one point, like, hey, I have a guest room, I like visitors. And I hadn't, we had always gotten along, but we didn't know each other that well. We met at a conference once and we got along and then we sort of stayed in touch. And so he came out and worked on his audio documentary for, 4 or 5 days and stayed with me and, stayed in my guest room. And we would have kind of coffee or tea in the morning. And I think I cooked dinner one night, like steak frites or something like that. And he was well into that. And then, he would just go off and do his thing. And I kind of lived my life. And I think the last night we either went out for a beer or we had cocktails or something like that. So we basically like hung out twice the entire time. He was here for like 5 days and the rest of the time we both just worked. But every now and again, we would take like a little coffee break and sort of chat about what we were working on and stuff like that. Yeah. And it was great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The working roommate. It's a brilliant thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And even like the working sort of couch surfer, except for, I have an actual guest room.
Well, let's get on down to business. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this book. I know we have a place to go with the reading, but I do have a mass hole question that I wanted to get in here at the front. But it sort of hinges on, did you listen to this book or did you actually read this one?
I listened and then went back and read certain passages.
And are you listening to the Audible version of it?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a town that features prominently in the second half of this book.
Oh, I think I know what it is.
What is it?
Well, let me think. There's a town that features prominently in the second half of this book.
Like over and over and over again. And about after the 100th time that it had been mispronounced, I was like, I know there's nothing that I can do here, and it's not this reader's problem. But boy, because I grew up 2 towns over from this town.
Is it one of the 128 towns, like suburbs? Okay, yes. So let me think.
Yes.
I don't remember. Is it Natick by any chance?
That's the correct pronunciation.
And how is it pronounced in the book? Natick. You keep saying Natick.
Natick. Yeah. And I was like, over and over again. I took and I mean, like, one nice thing is his depiction of Natick is so absolutely spot on. Natick and Framingham are like the last two towns that were like swallowed by Route 9. Like Route 9 was sort of like burrowing out from Boston in the east and like burrowing out from Worcester on the west. And basically Shrewsbury, Westboro, where I grew up, Framingham, and Natick were the last four to get kind of like pretty much just turned into bedroom communities by Route 9, which is a shitty road. Like Route 9 is, it's not an elevated highway. It's a divided highway.
With like 1,000
two
traffic
lanes on
lights
each side and about a billion Dunkin' Donuts. like, I mean, so like the place where that joke about two identical franchises on opposite sides of a highway just staring at each other.
Well, you don't want to do a
that
U-turn.
was born basically in my hometown. I know it wasn't.
We don't do fucking U-turns.
We don't do fucking U-turns. Though, however, the reader's command of the Boston accent for the lobsterman, I thought was great. His moment when he says, Gallagher says, "Sheesh." And everybody on the boat goes, sheesh.
What do you want to go there for?
I was like, oh my God, I'm home.
Yeah. Hey, we got us.
Hey, look.
We got us a long hair environmental.
Yeah.
We're not a bunch of dumb mix, ST. When he suggests, when he reminds them not to eat the like hydrocarbon charcoal.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Don't get the one with the self-lighting charcoal.
Yeah, we're not a bunch of dumb mix, SD.
No, we stopped eating those lobsters. Like,
you know, you kind of got us turned into environmentals ourselves. We did a little experiment.
I do use my phone and like voice memos to kind of, as I'm listening, do some chapter summary. And knew that it was really getting into my head when I was speaking and said, possible contamination site is in Dorchester Bay. And I was like, ah! It's like, it's all coming back. The accent that I grew up around is just worming its way back in.
Yeah, they're from all over the harbor, ST. Mostly Dorchester Bay. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that reader I thought did a real marvelous job.
The second half escalates in a way that at first I found really masterful, if a bit shocking. And then I find shocking and weird, exactly. And maybe not masterful, certainly talented. I think you used the phrase wild talent. And and I think as a compliment when we were talking about Snow Crash, this would be maybe using it as less of a compliment, which is just where you just see somebody sort of like with a fire hose of talent, just like spraying it all over a city block, regardless of where the actual fire might be. So, ST is kind of... Oh, well, we haven't done a plot recap yet. We should probably do that first, shouldn't we?
We should do a plot recap. I did, I did have a joke that as you were talking about sort of wild talent spraying all over the place, there is a throwaway moment where ST says, like my first orgasm. And I kind of wanted to say, or like your first book, Mr. Stephenson.
Yeah. Yes. I don't remember exactly what the metaphor was for, but... yeah, well, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I can start. So we're doing chapter 20 through 36 today.
Yeah,
dear listeners. The whole second half of Neal Stephenson's 1988 eco thriller Zodiac. We begin with a series of chapters that really is about launching us into this pretty over-the-top plot of the second half of the book. Chapter 20 is mostly a plot container for us to get Esmeralda's newspaper clipping about Pleshy in 1956, where we learn that in 1956, Pleshy was part of burying some old transformers in Boston Harbor, basically. The same transformers that get destroyed by a loose barge during a hurricane. We also learn about we have this meeting at Biotronic with our villain Laughlin, where we discover that the reason that they have kind of been able to stay ahead of ST up to this point is that they have come up with a bacterial strain that will eat PCBs. I just realized that my voice converter has done the same exact thing that the Poison Boysen fans did and turned PCB into PCP.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, exactly. But yeah, so we have this meeting between ST and our pretty big bad Laughlin, and Dolmacher, who is kind of our sucker. That the cards that they are holding, they want to kind of co-opt ST to get him on their side, because they think that they have come up with a way to get rid of toxic pollution. He sees through it and is like, you guys have no idea what you've created, and it could go horribly, horribly wrong. Which leads us into chapter 21, which is, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
I don't remember the exact chapter number, and I am not taking notes, but the next thing I remember happening is ST has basically come up, and I would say with like a level of intuition of the sort you kind of associate with Sherlock Holmes, suddenly has this entire story figured out of exactly what Biotronic and I forget the Balco chemicals have done wrong here in dumping. And suddenly he's put together all of these threads of, sensing the pollution and then the pollution going away and the lobstermen seeming to be poison. So he goes out on the harbor on his Zodiac looking for more evidence, and he gets another weird clue, which is that now all the lobstermen are sick, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because they say they're not eating the poison lobster anymore. And in fact, they stopped eating lobster altogether.
That's not totally correct. The guy who was sick has stopped eating lobster altogether. The other lobstermen are still eating lobsters, but they're not eating the oily or smelly ones. They're eating the clean ones, which becomes significant a little while. I had to read that whole section twice. So I understand I understand your misunderstanding, and I think it is a problem with the book.
Well, I think I picked that up when I read it. I bet I couldn't remember it super well. And part of what's going on here is that the plot is getting very, very complex, particularly when the chemistry part of the plot is very, very complex. And I think that Stephenson, at this point in his career, is not really good at understanding what the reader is going to follow super well. And so sometimes he'll drop little details in there that he really expects you to remember, and you're very unlikely to remember. And I don't know, maybe he sees that as sort of part of the challenge of reading his books too, the way a detective novelist might. But so there's this whole thing with the lobster fisherman that it originally confuses ST a little bit, and later he starts coming up with an hypothesis about what might be going on. But then I think while he's trying to gather more evidence about this, and I don't remember if there's an interluding, you have what I consider to be a really wonderful action sequence where he's diving for information, and then just in a really wonderful way becomes eerily aware. It's a foggy day, and he becomes eerily aware that there's another propeller, which kind of creeps him out because he didn't see any boats, which means if there's another boat out there, it's running without its running lights on, which means it's trying to be sneaky, which means it might be following him. So he discovers that sure enough, it's the same cigarette boat that he associates with Balco and potentially the thugs who he was chasing around in Buffalo, Niagara. And that institutes a whole sequence of events that is just a really thrilling, scary chase scene. Shades of Tom Ripley falling off the rowboat.
A very, very clear shade. The same thing.
Yes. Yes, even to the point of the boat going around in circles and him having and like swallowing water. I mean, it's almost like he must have he probably read that scene at some point, whether he was thinking about it or whether it just entered his subconsciousness when he was reaching. And, I'll read a passage of this later, but even when he regains the boat, then the adventure is just beginning. All of this ends in a boat chase across the harbor where he eventually tricks the two thugs who do seem like they're actively trying to kill him by running him over in their speedboat and calling it an accident. He tricks them into going a place where their boat really shouldn't go, and they blow up and die horribly in flames. And then he sort of drags himself to shore and flags down an environmentalist who recognizes him, who helps him get kind of cleaned up. At this point, the stakes have changed, right? Because this is the first moment that it's life and death. Up to this point, it does sort of have this kind of Encyclopedia Brown type feel or Hardy Boys, where like the worst thing that's going to happen is you're sneaking around and someone's going to call security and you might get arrested,
totally.
Or maybe they'll call dad and dad will be like, you leave that old factory alone, but now we're in a whole nother novel because it's life and death and they are trying to kill ST and he's freaked out by that. And so he warns his roommate and warns the people at the house to be on the lookout. But then he and Bart go on a sort of adventure through various communities in Boston with a little bit of racism thrown in. Yeah. And to try to kind of locate the source of some pollution because ST has an hypothesis about what's going on and he's trying to determine whether he can find some toxic dumping. And I'll throw it over to you at that point if you want to elucidate more. I don't expect our recap followers to fully follow the chemical plot that's going on here.
Yeah, I will say that the chemical plot hinges on the idea that most chemical reactions in the world of physics and chemistry can go in both directions. So this company, Biotronics, has created a PCB-eating bug that then poops out salt water. They have also been like, oh my God, if we can make the thing that we sell out of salt water, then why don't we just run this in the other direction? As is the case with almost every book or movie like this, this is the dwarves digging too deep in Moria. This is greed that eventually gets you killed. Yeah.
And we discover this a little bit later, sort of at Dolmacher's house after some other stuff.
But we get the second clue here, which is as they get closer to the purported source of the pollution, the signal gets weaker, which is the second really confusing thing for ST after the PCBs disappearing from the harbor after his first sample. But yeah, they go sewer diving all night long. They are successful enough of getting samples and pinning down where they think it's coming from. Biotronic does have a lab, they discover, pretty much at the end point of where they're finding the poison. They return, and then there's the first of many wildly implausible moments. He and Bart are sitting there listening to their voicemail machine. I can't even remember what it's called now.
Answering machine?
The answering machine. I was like, my brain can't come up with that noun anymore. And somebody has left a message.
Machine.
Voicemail. What is this? This is your voicemail machine, right?
That would have been a perfectly good name for it. It's just that we didn't really have voicemail until that had became a digital service offered by the phone company.
Exactly. So they discover from their answering machine that someone has planted a bomb in their basement. They escape the bomb by diving out the front window as the house explodes. In sort of a not unlike Lethal Weapon 3 moment where Danny Glover is Danny Glover or Mel Gibson on the toilet that's bombed?
I think it was Danny Glover.
Right. But that's how I imagined ST's house kind of going up in flames, was that house explosion.
I also imagined it a little bit like the scene in Pushing Tin where they run out and dive for cover and nothing happens for 10 seconds and then they're like, and then it explodes. Because he does say 10 seconds later.
But bringing
which
up
is,
this
that's
horrifying, like coincidence plausibility thing, which I think we're probably going to talk about. He knocks out his roommate and then basically figures out in a flash that he is now like a wanted terrorist, goes and gets the Zodiac, and after a very strange scene with a like Apache or Blackhawk an Apache attack helicopter,
I think a Cobra attack helicopter, because he describes it as having a very narrow fuselage.
He does in fact escape to Maine, and well, sort of Maine, kind of. Neal Stephenson's Maine is kind of like his Oregon in Snow Crash. Eventually makes it to New Hampshire, where he is brought back to life by his friend Jim. Then we meet Hank Boone, the actual eco-terrorist, and then learn his actual story, that he's not really an eco-terrorist. He is used as kind of a boogeyman for rich whalers to sink their ships and collect the insurance money. And that is where we begin learning, as there's sort of this resuscitation, rejuvenation, convalescence period, kind of like the terrible convalescence period in Casino Royale, which is altogether too long and has too many bathrobes. So we kind of get the gang for, if you had described Heist 1 and Heist 2 from the first half of the book, I would call this section like getting the team together. Because we get Hank Boone and Jim the Indian, and they all go off. They begin putting everything together, which means that they really have discovered that Dolmacher is sick. He has eaten the bug that goes the other direction, or he's been poisoned by it. And so the bacteria in his gut is presently turning the salt in his diet into PCBs and other toxic substances, a whole bunch of covalent chlorine, which is going to poison him and probably kill him. For revenge, he sets off to New Hampshire to perhaps assassinate Alvin Pleshy, who is the head of, or is part of this Balco Biotronics toxic issue, and a former U.S. cabinet member, that he's probably headed off to assassinate Pleshy, and I will send it back over to you.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, I remember how you had sort of remembered the vacation in Nova Scotia is happening at the end of the book. You said last time, and I remember this sort of stalking around the woods looking for Dolmacher as like the climactic scene of this book. Which it's not,
but it could be. It's the thing.
It could have been, which might be why I remember it that way. There's a real sense of like the hero dying and being reborn in the White Mountains. He's really unwell, and when he's fully recovered, we're understood that he's lost 20 pounds. He was a little plump before, by his own admission, but now he's a lean and mean ST. And they dye his hair and shave him, so he looks different. And yes, he's kind of put together. He's now like this new team. I mean, this is the elite of the elite, like Jim Grandfather, Boone, and ST. There's kind of like, in the same way the stakes escalated, that now this is a life and death book where you can get killed. It's also, this is like a leaner and meaner and more angry and more mature ST. I think we're meant to understand who spent his 40 days and 40 nights in the White Mountains, and is now he's girded for war. And so. They go to try to foil Dolmacher. Not so much because they don't want Pleshy to get assassinated. Pleshy, by the way, is running for president, and not because they like Pleshy or want him to not get killed, but because Dolmacher understands the science of this bug that's being dumped into the harbor, this sort of genetically engineered microorganism. So they figure they need him to combat it. And so they don't want to get him. They don't want him to get in a shootout with the cops because he tries to assassinate. And so there's a certain amount of woodcraft, really amusing interaction with some survival game players, including a guy who wakes up at 4 a.m. and has his coffee prepped the night before, which is like the ultimate in preparedness in sort of ST's telling.
No, I do that, and I was like, "Come on, what the fuck?" Like that's
I do that. I do that too. But you know, maybe you and I are natural leaders. So they track down Dolmalker at the last moment, and they've kind of split up, and Jim Grandfather, the native guy, incapacitates him with fishing arrows, which is a fun and very Stephenson-like sort of plot device of sort of like woodcraft and live action. And Boone, who's in disguise as a regular environmentalist as opposed to an eco-terrorist, gets in kind of a shouting match with Pleshy, and at the last minute throws himself on top of Pleshy and knocks him down in order to get him out of the way of the assassin bullet, which turns out to be paintball. So it turns out that Dolmalker was not trying to assassinate Pleshy all along, but merely embarrass him. Although Dolmacher is also understood to be kind of off his rocker at this point. And so then basically at this point, ST and Boone, still in disguise, are now considered kind of heroes, more or less. And they go back to Boston by way of a free helicopter ride, and they consult with this guy named, what's his name?
Kelvin. Yeah,
Kelvin,
yeah,
right? I knew he was one of the great,
has, like a science name insert, and I was like, really?
Yeah, I knew he was one of the, like, you know, Royal Society fellows. And this guy feels like he has a solution to the bug that Balco has put in the harbor. But the other thing is that ST and Boone really want to catch them at what they're up to, and they figure the way to do this is to steal this freighter, which Balco has been using to both contaminate the harbor, but also they have a kind of, the freighter has a lot of this toxic material on it, and they have a way of kind of under the waterline dumping it throughout the harbor. So ST and Boone want to capture that freighter so they can prove that Balco, who has connections with Pleshy, are, you know, have been contaminating the harbor illegally.
But our old friend Wayne, who is destroyer of G vehicles, destroyer of vans, and other things, is one of the sort of plot irritants that is going to really accelerate this book into its final shenanigans.
And Smirnoff.
Right. Yes, so
Smirnoff,
Wayne,
who we meet in the very first chapter, makes an appearance.
Wayne has been hanging out with Smirnoff, the like, we're led to believe, like, pretty shitty eco-terrorist. Like, lots of more sizzle than steak, but in this case, has a real plan to blow up Alvin Pleshy's, the Balco Explorer, to blow up this large boat that has all of this toxic chemicals in it, which is a disaster. Then all of that stuff is going to get out into the harbor, and there won't be any way of pinning it on Pleshy and Laughlin and Basco. I keep calling it Balco, which is funny because that is another, that is a real world.
I may have referred to it as Balco.
Basco and Biotronics. But before we get to all that, there is like just this insane series of scenes out back on Spectacle Island, where the Poison Boysen after party is taking place in this like heaven and hell themed party on this crashed barge. That if you get down into the bowels of it, you will find the Poison Boysen satanic rituals.
Oh God, I forgot about this. This was like this weird subplot
Yeah. This whole subplot where they get into some fights where there are grenade booby traps. Bart shoots to death, I think, 3 of these like satanic people who just kind of attack ST and Boone. And they have knives. You're not quite sure if it is going to be lethal, but it gets lethal really quickly as Bart basically just kills them.
And we don't know if they're attacking because they're just like Satanists doing their ritual, or that they are sort of pressed by Balco and Laughlin to kind of defend the evidence. They kind of feel like video game sub-bosses to me, in a way. It's like the boss left them there to defend the evidence because there was some toxic waste dumped there in the Transformers.
And we get the sense that Laughlin is the one who has done the booby trapping of leaving these grenades behind to really kind of keep people at bay. I think this is all a setup to allow ST to rescue Debbie from Laughlin, who's got her in a boat after kind of apprehending her. It's sort of like she sort of plays the role of a not great YT in this moment because ST actually goes and saves her, whereas in Snow Crash, YT more than fends for herself.
She's like YT without the Nancy Drew.
Exactly. Debbie does have a very brave moment where she throws herself into the harbor wearing handcuffs, which you're sort of like, oh God, that is a bold thing to do.
And she was also behaving extremely heroically and competently before she was captured too, documenting some dumping of pollution, and that she was having her own adventure and performing quite well. We're meant to understand that she's good at what she does.
And Boone head out to the Basco Explorer, and Bart and ST in this very charming way just kind of invite themselves onto the ship. And the 19-year-old merchant marines are like, yeah, come on up.
I found that completely plausible too.
That was
right?
like one of the more plausible moments where these bored 19-year-old kids are like, oh my God, you have beer? Like, you've been talking to girls? Yes, come up, tell us about it.
And it's played for dramatic irony, too, because while this is happening, they're supposed to be creating a diversion for Boone in like a frogman suit to sneak onto the boat. But the diversion proves more effective than the commando tactics.
I'm going to try to fast forward here a little bit. The Basco Explorer they do get to the Basco Explorer. ST dives down below to start looking for the mines that Smirnoff and Wayne, the names are like jokes, have affixed to the bottom of the hull, finds them, but also discovers that there are 2 divers down here, one of whom gets killed very quickly. The other is our friend Tom Akers, who is riddled with cancer and also hatred for Alvin Pleshy, who is thrown in with Smirnoff, we think, as part of this plot to bomb the Basco Explorer.
I had to read that section like 3 times to understand what the hell was going on. I think I figured it out, but...
why don't you wrap it up for us?
All right. I won't go into the details, but basically it becomes an adventure story at this point. ST disables the bomb. Meanwhile, the fishermen have convinced their brother, the other Gallaghers, who have some implication in creating Spectacle Island in the first place, to sort of atone for some evil deeds done generations ago and drive their big-ass megaton called the Extra Stout into this channel or harbor and basically help G and ST tow the freighter away. All this is happening where the security guards from Basco are having a shootout, and they're shooting at ST and Boone, who are on the ship trying to secure the tow line. They both take some hits, but they're both more or less okay, although we learn that Boone suffers a sucking chest wound, but manages to avoid passing out by using his wetsuit as a seal.
His forearm. He lies on his forearm, and you're like, okay.
Yeah. Boone is tactically rather badass too. And some other and ST uses these kind of like very effective stink bombs and as part of this heist too. But basically, they managed to steal the yacht. I'm trying to even remember what happens to they don't, sorry, it's not the yacht, the freighter. They steal the freighter, they go out in the middle of the harbor, and they get their media moment. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else notable that happens in the midst of all this. Like, what happens to Laughlin? I'm trying to remember.
I remember there is like a final showdown with Laughlin, and he's got his gun. But you're right, like it doesn't stick out to me what...
He has his gun, and they're on the gangplank, but my best recollection is that basically like, oh, does Boone intercede and like just like crack him in the back of the head with a pipe or something like that? And then ST convinces his goons to drag. Basically, he's like, get the hell out of here and take him with you because they don't want to be doing kidnapping. So I feel like he sort of leaves the scene kind of half knocked out, having been defeated. He's lost his gun, and they have his briefcase too, which has some evidence in it.
Boone shoots him in the ear with a fire extinguisher. Rendering him incapacitated, writhing, the word is. There is a fun sentence. Several barfing blue-collar gnomes came up from below, stumbled over the writhing Laughlin and headed towards me, which is to say they tried to get the fuck out of here. But yes, they...
And ST is like, take this guy with you, because we don't want to be. He
doesn't end up dead, but he does end up incapacitated enough. And just in time for the extra stout to tow away the Basco Explorer, which is the evidence they need to close the case.
Yeah. Sorry, reader, that we the plot is extremely complex. And although it is a rollicking adventure story, there are a lot of details that you have to track. And the fact that it is a lively plot that is animated by really fairly complex chemical science is in and of itself impressive. Anyway, I thought maybe I would just read some of that moment where, for me, the book becomes a different book, but in a good way, where we have that escalation, if that's all right.
Let's do it. I love it.
So he's diving. It's a foggy day. It's this wonderfully written scene, I think, where he is underwater and he hears the sound of a boat engine and he thinks, that's funny. I didn't see any boats. I don't see any running lights. Someone's trying to be stealthy. Maybe it's someone trying to, sneak up on me. And he swims and discovers the cigarette boat, which he had encountered earlier. So then he is like, oh, these guys are probably here to do me wrong. So he tries to sneak back into his Zodiac and he kind of fails. They hear him kind of fish belly flop into the Zodiac. And so they fire it up and they basically come at him and they pull out a gun. Like, these are the two guys. And he's in the Zodiac, but he hasn't been able to get the engine to start yet. I remembered having tried to pistol shoot at Jim Grandfather's, noticing how hard it actually was after having watched TV and movies my whole life to actually hit something with a handgun. These guys were on a small boat and so was I. I didn't figure they were going to nail me with one shot, which didn't prevent me from being scared shitless. When I saw the gun, I fell back on my ass, tipping the whole Zod up. The cigarette overshot me and had to turn around for another pass. That gave me time to notice a little surprise they'd left behind. Pair of small darts stuck into the side of my Zodiac, and they were sputtering at me, throwing off a transparent bluish light. I'd heard about this from Dolmacher. It was a taser. If I hadn't fallen back, those darts would be stuck in my skin, and that electrical charge would be running through my nervous system, and I'd be unconscious, or wishing I was, long enough for them to rev up and run me over in their cigarette at about 80 miles an hour. Sorry, officer, it was foggy. The wake of the cigarette was throwing the Zod around like a teeter-totter. Something heavy smashed into my foot. It was our big nautical strobe light. So when the cigarette cruised by me for the second attempt, I turned the strobe on, held it over my head like a basketball, and made a 3-point jump shot right into their cockpit. Nice second effort, boys, I hollered. The light had half blinded me too, but I didn't need perfect vision to start the motor. They needed it to take a shot at me. Time for another try at the motor. This time I did it right. Set the throttle on start and choked it. 3 more hauls on the ripcord and it started. Then it died. I put the choke back in and hauled it once more, getting a good start. I had to lean way over to shift it into forward gear, and that's how I got tossed out of the boat.
What?
And it continues for like another 5 pages at a similar level of sort of tension and drama. And it's so every time you think ST is going to kind of gain an advantage and escape, he gains a slight advantage and then it's taken away from him over and over and over again. And I read this 7 years ago. I knew who wins. I know who the protagonist is. I more or less remembered what happened, and I still was incredibly tense when I read this passage. I think it's masterful, and it is like, even at the time, though, I was a little bit uncomfortable by the level of escalation because there was nothing about this book to me that said this was life and death up to this point. But I kind of found myself going with it, I think, just because it was so well written. And it's like, all right, well, that was also the escalation for ST too. You know, he didn't know it was life or death.
Yeah, very similar reaction. What really was amazing for me from a craft perspective is the number of times that he employs a relatively similar tactic of basically like red herringing off in one direction and then whipping the Zodiac around real fast and letting them overshoot him. And it never feels trite or overused. It feels like the thing that you would do when you kind of have limited resources and 1 or 2 tricks that you could pull and the stakes are very high. And I think the reason this section succeeds in ways that maybe the rest of the book might not is that it sits in a real nice Venn diagram of, okay, the plot has to escalate. Like we really do need to, as you said, depart Encyclopedia Brown territory, and nudge things up a little bit. And this was probably the right level. Like, and we even like the fact that he even kills these two, and it makes the section in Buffalo a little bit better because we sort of learn that Kleinhofe and Dietrich, he even gives them German names. They really are like bad dudes. And that it's okay that they end up sort of blowing up in like an action movie 80s fireball.
Although you could imagine a version of this book where they just like end up Biff style, like under a garbage skip with a bunch of like rotting fruit on them. And that was like their chief comeuppance. Like, and it almost sort of, the first half of the book, that's what would have happened to them at the end of one of these moments.
And I think, and we'll talk about this later, I think we're sort of headed that direction, is that like on the slider of like escalating the plot, like this is one of those cases where you get the volume slider wrong because you just keep turning it up. And for, you know, it's like the old cliche that a clock is correct twice a day. There's this moment as he's escalating the plot in this chapter where you're like, yes, stay here. This is right. This is the right scope of the book. And Neal Stephenson is like, nah.
Neal Stephenson's like, this plot goes to 11.
The echo of the Ripley moment with the book was, I was just like, you are kidding me. It's the exact same structure. It made me feel very lucky that we're kind of casting a really wide net with our books, might bump into other strange echoes as we read, you know, more widely. Because that was super fun and unlooked for. It was great. I really did enjoy this section quite a bit, especially the move from quiet action to loud action, which I think he does really well.
Yeah,
this section of him swimming around underneath the cigarette boat and like, because you know, you and I have both spent time in water. Like you can hear a propeller from a long way away underwater. It's amazing.
Well, and you know, when you're swimming around and you're by yourself, I mean, just the isolation and the vulnerability he's experiencing in that moment too, you know, is very relatable. You know, when you're coming up and you're like, these people are watching me and I'm all out here by myself and no one can see me. there's a real, like in the Boston Harbor when it's foggy, no one can hear you scream kind of vibe to that.
Yeah.
No one can hear you scream, bud. Out there.
No one can hear you scream in the harbor.
Not in the harbor. Not when it's foggy.
Not on a foggy day.
Oh, they'll hear the screaming,
way.
but they'll have no fucking idea where it's coming from. They'll think it's a herring goal.
Let's keep going. Let's follow the turning up of the volume.
All right. What do you want me to do? My next reading then, which is this is where I think that gets ridiculous.
Yeah, because I think your observation or questions about acid should come after this. But I think this is another moment where perhaps you and I, having spent some time in boats, makes this, and I think most people would read this section as implausible, but I think particularly for anybody who spent time in a sea over 6 feet, this particular section of the book, you're like,
well, I was actually going to read the part a little bit before that too, but I know what you're talking about, and it's only like 2 paragraphs before, because to me the moment it really gets weird is the voicemail.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, let's go there.
So that's where I was going to start. So basically, we already explained this in the recap, but this is roughly 24 hours of the scene I just described where ST gets away by, eluding and blowing up the 2 guys who tried to kill him. There's been some sewer crawling, and then he and Bart are exhausted. They head back to their home. They're checking their messages. There are a couple different messages. We get a message from Debbie, and she's describing the car, the Omni, being stolen. So she says, I heard something outside. Looked out the window, and there was a big guy out there in a suit, which, by the way, is an important plot point that you really don't notice in this moment because it's obscured by what happens next. It's one of those moments where Stephenson's asking the reader to remember too much, I think. There was a big guy out there in a suit, and there was a big black car waiting next to him, and this guy just got in the car with keys and started it up and drove away. They already had keys made. Beep! Your house is a huge fucking bomb in the basement. Get out now. Beep! Hey, this is Dolmacher. But I missed the rest because Bart was throwing a chair through the window. About 10 seconds later, my train set got scattered all over Brighton and points downward. We were lying down in Boston's largest backyard behind a heap of Roscommon's concrete trash. A few pieces of his stupid vinyl siding fluttered down on our backs, but that was it. I got an A in chemistry, and I could tell it wasn't a gas explosion. It was high explosives, planted there the night before, which meant it had been done with Roscommon's help. But why would he help? Because they were big enough to make him an offer he couldn't refuse, a Basco-sized organization, and because he wanted to get rid of this house anyway. Brighton bomb factory explodes, killing 2. FBI says Taylor was actually a terrorist. Direct action campaign, a cover for violence? Bart rolled over on his back. Intense, he said. I yanked the revolver out of his belt, grabbed it by the barrel, and laid open his right eyebrow. I grabbed his keys and ran for the van. I thought ST was a man of peace, says shocked roommate. G terrorist desperate escape from bomb site. Inside, Sangamon Taylor. Jekyll and Hyde personality? While I was headed cross town, it started to rain. Downtown, there was a waterfront park, and that's where I assembled the Zodiac. Out on the water, a Coast Guard cutter was towing an 80-foot pleasure palace out away from the yacht club, into open water. G, car found near yacht club. Abandoned mining attempt? I recognized the yacht. Alvin Pleshy liked to go fishing in it. It was being shadowed by a couple of fireboats, and cops were swarming around on the decks. Pleshy's terror cruise. ST's bombs on ex-VP's yacht. He hated Pleshy from the beginning. I took it out of there nice and easy. Didn't crank up the throttle until I was out past the airport, and then ran full tilt until all I could see was waves and rain and rain. A nor'easter was bearing down from Greenland. A big, blue, nasty-looking son of a bitch. We had an exposure suit in there, so I pulled it on and then crammed myself into my Levi's so I wouldn't be so fucking orange. I pointed her north, into the storm clouds, into the waves. Nothing could find me in that. Not cigarettes, not CG cutters, neither helicopters nor satellites. Or so I thought, until the helicopter gunship came up on my stern.
How many wild coincidences have taken place in just that's book in my edition? That's not even 2 full pages.
Yeah, that was about a page and a half. Yeah.
Plot implausibilities do you count in that section?
Well, okay, so there are wild coincidences that are convenient for the plot, like the bomb going off within 10 seconds of
10
when they hear
seconds.
that message. That there are also implausibilities that we're meant to understand in sort of like ST's paranoid brain is him putting together in maybe a bit of a paranoid way the conspiracy allied against him, which we come to understand there is a conspiracy against him, although he's also in a moment where I think we're meant to understand that he's maybe over imagining maybe the scope of the fantasy or of the conspiracy, or maybe not. There's also moments that I just find inexplicable. Like, I don't understand why he pistol whips Bart, unless it's maybe to give Bart some kind of like alibi.
I believe that's what it is. I believe he is leaning in to the depiction because, as you kind of said earlier, he suddenly has this sort of Sherlock Holmes-esque like ability to see the plot and understand everything, and is able, in a moment where his house has just been exploded, to like see not just the current but the future unfolding. And I do kind of like the imagined newspapers. I think that's like a fun.
No, I love that. I know. The writing here is good. Like the snappiness of the prose, and the fact that in about a page and a half he gets you from his house to like, I don't know, like Marblehead, like Marblehead. Yeah, I mean, like the economy and the snappiness and the newspapers and all of that is really, really good. It's just like I didn't feel prepared for everything that was happening. Right. And if the pistol whipping is some kind of alibi, I don't think that's ever explained.
He says he apologizes, but he's also like And
Bart's just like, yeah, don't worry about it.
Bart's like, yeah, and Bart plays along masterfully while ST is gone. So my reading is that it's a way to give Bart some cover. So he is not an unindicted co-conspirator.
I feel like there are easier ways to have done that, which is even like, hey, buddy, they're coming after me. I got to make this look real. Close your eyes.
But if you are like 20-something-year-old Neal Stephenson and you are high on acid and you have just written this chapter about the cigarette boat, you're going to be like, no. Beat up Bart.
Yeah. Well, I think that might be. Yeah, I think that might be what's happening.
The one that really sticks in my craw in this section is the coincidence that Pleshy's yacht is there as he is leaving the harbor,
which turns out to be a red herring, right? Because there's no bomb on the yacht or anything, nor there's this whole like fever dream. I mean, to me, it's interesting, which is like, is the helicopter a flash forward? Because it just doesn't seem plausible to me that even that the helicopter. So what happens after this is that a helicopter comes out of nowhere and starts shooting at him in the teeth of the gale that has just roared down from Greenland, which ST is able to motor through in about a half hour. Right? He comes out, And I don't know if the idea is that Stephenson is meaning for us to suggest that this is a blend of paranoid hallucination and reality, and that it's all being narrated from ST's like recuperating memory, 6 weeks later in Gorham, New Hampshire, or after motoring up what very well could have been the Saco River, or the Piscataqua. How do you say that? Piscataqua River. It's based on his description. It's one of those two, because that those are the only two rivers that are going to be navigable up to the White Mountains, and both of them have like lakes that then turn back into rivers that then turn into lakes too. So the geography is actually somewhat accurate in terms of what he's describing here. I love the idea that he stopped at the gas station too, which is like, I went to shore and stopped at the gas station. He's like, does he mean a marina? Did he beach the Zodiac? Does he remember? The guy looked like Adlai Stevenson or right?
Spiro
Agnew, right? Yeah. No, and there's a heavy dose of Hunter S. Thompson in this whole section too, right? This is like Fear and Loathing in the Boston Harbor.
Yeah, but without the narrative control of Hunter S. Thompson, like without there's just like Stephenson doesn't have the control yet. He's got the chops for sure. He's got great sentences, but he's just it's like yeah, he's like a 17-year-old kid that can't help himself.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. I think it's very generous of you to say that this might be like a remembered fever dream. There's no clue for that, except
Right.
unless we're supposed to start thinking that the LSD kind of conjures it in reverse.
That's the only. That's the only clue.
And
The only clue is that he takes acid later, and
yeah.
and like if it and that's the only clue. But I agree I don't think that if that's what we're supposed to think, we're being very kind because he's
Yeah,
not
'cause I
doing
think
his job.
if you're gonna do something like that as a writer, I think. So you've just had this very fun, gripping action sequence in the harbor where he's running away from the cigarette boat. A lot of the sentences here are very similar to those. It's the same
Yeah.
kind of feeling. If you really did want to make this a fever dream, you would have to change something in your prose for that to actually land with the reader, that it's going to be a different thing. And it's just too simple. It's too similar. Flipping off the helicopter pilots. There's one moment when he's like, I was eye to eye with them. And I was like, if they wanted to kill you, they would just hold the trigger down at that moment and not worry about it. And it would be like in Snow Crash when they're using reason on things and stuff just disappears, which is really, I mean, like there's, I mean, the idea of piloting a Zodiac successfully up and down 30-foot seas is a lot to swallow.
Yeah, well, it does. It depends actually on how steep the seas are. If they're big ocean rollers that are like swells, sure. If they're starting to tumble over, if they're starting to break, he's likely going to swamp. But it's
Right.
also, yeah. I mean, I do probably believe that it would be very hard for a helicopter to shoot a raft in that kind of condition. I think that's probably true. I guess the one thing if I'm going to be kind to Stephenson again, though, the one difference in at least in the section I read, though, is that basically he takes every single after he knocks out Bart. There's this period where every sentence stands in for about 10 minutes. While I was headed crosstown, it started to rain. Downtown there was a waterfront park, and that's where I assembled the Zodiac. Zodiac takes about 20 minutes to assemble. I watched a video today. Out on the water, a Coast Guard cutter was towing an 80-foot pleasure palace. That whereas that's happening, he's doing a sentence every 10 minutes. The section you were talking about, the action sequence, like every second is 3 or 4 lines. So there is something kind of flashbacky about that way you just have images in memory too. But you're right. But by the time we get to the helicopter pilot, it is slowed down into that sort of action sequence. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
And also, I don't know even, I don't know, even the history of our government's reactions to terrorism. I don't think that they would scramble a Cobra attack helicopter to we're even just we're pretty close to habited waters.
Also, and also, how did they find him? Unless they were just like, oh, as soon as he makes a run for it, he's going for the Zodiac. He's gonna. We know his. But also, could he not have just driven the van out onto I-95 and up to Maine?
Yeah.
It's Bart's van, right? I mean, I don't. Where did the helicopter come from? Is it supposed to be? There wasn't even Homeland Security, so it's supposed to be Special Forces. Or do the FBI have Cobra attack helicopters? It's and there's a level of paranoia here and sort of attribution of sort of A, sinisterness, and B, competence of the surveillance state that is nowadays largely sort of the provenance of the radical right. But I think in these days, there is a sort of anarcho-libertarian radical environmentalist, and it feels exactly like the sort of scenario people like that would imagine, right? Oh yeah, of course, they're tracking our calls, and they've got the helicopters ready to go. They're gonna plant a bomb, and I'm gonna go ahead and take the Zodiac to the harbor because that's the least thing they're expecting. But who knows? They might get me with a helicopter. You know, like that's like the kind of thing you can imagine somebody like that thinking, but it wouldn't actually happen that way. If they really wanted to catch him, there just would be a bunch of feds in his parking lot.
Right, exactly. They're not going to, and it's just it happens too quickly.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just like who makes the call? Why don't they check out Biotronics and Pleshy's like claims if Pleshy's even involved? Which like you never really get the sense that he is. And you're just like, does Laughlin really have this much clout? Like, I don't think so.
And there's nothing else in the book that indicates he has that much clout, you know? Like generally when ST encounters cops, he's usually able to manage them. If Laughlin was that clouded up, there would be more problems with the constabulary. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you know, this book probably fully realized would be much longer, and it would be much worse as well. If Stephenson really indulged these impulses, because then like now we have this weird paranoid anarcho like run away from the police state, which morphs into like
40 days and 40 nights in the desert.
Rejuvenation, like hero's journey, like you said, like coming
it's
back
like it's like Tonto finding the Lone Ranger and nursing him back to health.
God, yes, you know? I know. It's just awful. And then there's this whole other climax about like the survivalist game and Pleshy getting shot with the paintball, and then another climax with the booby-trapped barge, and another climax with the Basco Explorer. Like, you really get the sense of Stephenson as a young writer being like, shit. And
which one of those would you choose if you as a book ending? Because any of them could have worked.
I would have tried to get to the ending of the book that we have a lot without the interstitial stuff. I could really skip the Dolmacher assassination. Like, we could get rid of all of that. Kelvin in this book is the combination of the librarian and Juanita. Yeah. Sort of the smart, sciencey person who comes up with the Deus Ex Machina to save everything. Yeah. But I would get rid of the survivalist assassination attempt, because Pleshy is kind of the big bad evil guy, but only in so much as he stands in for a particular kind of hatred of government.
And it ends up being a completely red herring anyway, because Dolmacher doesn't help them. The only thing Dolmacher really does to advance the plot is he brings attention to the toxins in the harbor, and he makes Sangamon Taylor's complaint seem more plausible.
And I like that section where we get the description of Dolmacher realizing that he has been betrayed. By Biotronic.
The bleach in the toilet and the dead body and all of that.
The dead guy in the sink.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's good. And it gives it makes a bland character much more interesting. And then he just gets rid of him. Yeah. And you're this book is so overplotted in some areas and so underplotted in others.
There are a number of characters who are interesting characters who are introduced, show the promise of doing something fascinating and interesting, don't realize that promise, and then their plot is sewn up in a very clumsy way. I think Dolmacher's a great example of that. Also, Cohen, does he ever show up again? Do we see Cohen?
Oh my God, you're right. He never returns.
Aren't we sort of being set up for Cohen at some point, like for ST calling Cohen and be like, hey, I've got something for you, you know, or something like that?
Yeah. Like you sort of feel like you like the place that Cohen would come in the movie is like at the very end, like when John McClane is kind of like mopping stuff up, and like the last remaining like helpful cops, not the really annoying cops, are like, we'll take it from here, you know, that kind of thing. And you're right, Cohen, like that is a promise that is absolutely never picked up again.
Yeah, and I mean, I also think I forget what's the Navy diver's name who with the cancer.
Tom Akers.
Yeah, Tom Akers also just sort of like his resolution I found very unsatisfying, a bit implausible. First of all, it's like what we're meant to understand in that section. So this is when they're under the freighter. And there's this, it's almost like sort of Keystone Cops. Oh, there's 3 divers. There's this sort of like, how many divers are there? It's almost like a Benny Hill sort of like scene where there's one more diver than you expect. Although that's all written really well in terms of the like what he can see and how deep everything is and sort of the three-dimensional action of that. But there's this moment essentially where I think the Basco security shows up and is maybe going to discover the mine. And then Tom Akers just like fucking kills him with a knife all of a sudden, which is also quite the escalation. Although I guess we understand that Tom Akers is really pissed off about his cancer, so he wants to blow this up. But that seems strange. And then, of course, ST is like, Tom Akers has no idea who I am. He's a trained diver with a knife. I'm dead. But basically all that really seems to happen is that like somehow ST gets the light shown on his face. Tom Akers realizes who he is and seems to like using ESP figure out that, oh, he's really on ST's side, that the bomb is actually, the bomb that he was there to plant is actually a good thing, and that he's now in his like dying seconds of life because he's been poisoned by the PCBs, going to help ST disarm the 2 bombs. That's the thing he does, is he holds up the finger 2, and there's actually 2 bombs. And all that's very confusing, and it doesn't seem to make any sense. It all seems a little bit implausible and disappointing, even though there's moments again that are absolutely brilliant, just in sort of the visuals of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Are
well, yeah.
well
I mean, I'm not sure if this is your question about acid, but this book does feel like at times those periods of a psychedelic experience that move in and out of like sharp focus that are interesting or whatever. But there are these great set pieces in this book of action and wit and verve. And then these like strange periods where you're like, I don't really know what's happening right now. I'm on this trip and I don't really understand it. And it doesn't really make sense. And it's not very explained. And that is really what my experience of this book is, that it is like, it is a lot like a psychedelic trip where you understand some of it and it's heavy with meaning. And then there's a lot of it that is really inchoate.
And I think, it's probably dutiful, which is your term, enough that if you work really hard, you can find the threads. And you're like, oh, what Tom Akers was doing, diving under there, and why he did what he did, that was buried in that paragraph 100 pages ago. And if I read it really carefully, but we're not geniuses, you don't remember every single detail. My question about acid, we sort of got in earlier. It was really more of a setup, which is that ST took the acid, roughly 40 or 50 miles into his cruise away from the helicopter. But when did Stephenson take the acid while writing that section? And was it not a bit before ST took the acid?
Let's see. One of my questions I've got for you is there were so many echoes of Snow Crash in this book, so many moments that I was like, oh, he's going to write that again and he's going to write it better. I'll give you a few examples of mine to give your brain a chance to start coming up with a few of yours. Laughlin is the steroided teenager in the bimbo box that tries to, because there's so many descriptions of Laughlin sort of being like really kind of over muscled and like wants to use the muscles and is kind of pumping with like physical power.
Also Jason, the incompetent mafioso.
Exactly right. Yeah. With the huge deltoids.
The iron pumper.
The iron pumper. So that's one of them. And then the Zodiac getting cut clean in two by the samuroid sword of the hull of the cigarette boat. I was like, it was like he is going to come back to that idea of things getting severed cleanly by swords in his very next book. And there are a few other ones, but I was wondering if there are any ones that stuck out to you.
I mean, there are lots and there's lots. And, I mean, we even talked about sort of the resonances between ST's relationship to Debbie and Hero's relationship to Juanita. They both just sort of realize that they need to be more assertive about sharing their feelings, which I guess that's a big boy thing for a 28-year-old to figure out. So, maybe that counts as change. One that occurs to me along those lines, just the ways in which some of the kind of like frogman commando exploits return in the scene where Hero and the mafioso, where they show up with the pirates' yacht and they're attacked by all the frogmen, and some of the like 3-dimensional space and sneaking onto the boats and just some of the action scenes. Obviously, Hero and the Zodiac in the raft is, it's sort of like he's channeling his ST. Hero has his own like piloting the Zodiac through the infrastructure, and I mean, so that, and then I think a big one, which I think he does much better in Snow Crash, is a moment of like a sudden change in the context of the novel from like hyper urban to hyper rural. So in the escape through the harbor, dodging the helicopter, through the nor'easter, like up the Ogunquit River, buying some gas, ditching the conveyance, and then like entering a whole new context. I mean, that's very similar to Hero buying the motorcycle and driving up Route 5 until he gets to Oregon and then having a few adventures up there. And then, in fact, ditching the motorcycle and then getting, onto the sort of the next, like, the next theater of plot, which is the raft. That's done super well in Snow Crash. It's also, as I think you said, absolutely unnecessary in this book. You don't really need him to leave Boston. He could have just stayed in Boston the entire time. It's not really necessary. It actually is necessary in Snow Crash because where the climax is happening for Hero is the raft. Where the climax is happening for ST is Boston. And Stephenson, in some way that makes sense to me as like somebody who would like to write a novel and never has, is like, I need to sort of like reset my hero in some way. You have an Act 2 climax, right? Which is the house blowing up. And then the sort of chase scene at the end of it. And then I need a reset. I need some downtime, and then we're going to resume. He's doing that, but he does it in a way that doesn't make any sense plotting-wise. You don't need to go to... hanging around with Boone and Jim Grandfather is fun. I like Jim Grandfather as a character. Like, I'm happy to like watch him shoot fish arrows at people. I almost feel like he should have just saved another book for Jim Grandfather.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's this. He really needed, somebody to be like, okay, Neal, nice job. Good start.
This isn't really good shape.
Right, yeah.
You're really onto something here.
Like, good, like, hell yeah. We're going to publish your book.
Yeah. We got something here.
And maybe this is 2 books or one much, much longer book. Or what our preference would be, Mr. Stephenson, is that this book is maybe a little thinner. We really think you could cut about 80 pages from this, and it's going to be tighter and faster and a little more cohesive. Because I do think you're totally right. There's so many red herrings. There is a lot in this book plotting wise that is necessary, but then he also indulges some things where you're just like, no, we didn't need that. There was another way to make that happen.
And so there's also another version of that too, actually. I totally agree with that. And I'm imagining Stephenson having that meeting and then like being kind of really pissed off because he thought the book was perfect, and then going out for pizza and skee ball and beer, and then doing some nitrous and blotter acid, and then like taking a cruise around the harbor, and then like passing out and waking up like on that beach where all the turds wake up and wash up in Southie with a hangover, and then being like, yeah, I guess they're right, and then going home and writing it after getting all of his like 28-year-old misbehavior out of the way. And there's also another version of it in which you could keep Jim Grandfather. I don't think you would need Boone, where actually the whole Dolmacher Pleshy assassination gambit becomes the last third of the book. It expands, and Laughlin comes after Dolmacher too with some of his goons, and they're all kind of like stomping around the woods in New Hampshire, like shooting each other with arrows.
And then you can use the survival game as your, because like it's set up, it's there.
They stumble into the survival game. Yeah. And something with that happens somehow too. Like maybe a bunch of Laughlin's goons pretend they're playing the survival game, but they have real guns and they're actually trying to track down Dolmacher. And I mean, that could be good. And Jim Cranfather would work perfectly well in that context, right? He would be the ace in the sleeve. And, and you would not even have to go back to Boston. And that becomes capture the flag and Dolmacher's the flag. And Dolmacher has the key. He both can testify and explain what Basco has done, and he can also give the chemical formula that's going to save Boston Harbor. And by the way, the world, because this formula is like Ice 9 and will end all life on the planet. Maybe. According to Kelvin.
Well, I did like that moment when there was this great moment of like good scientific skepticism where it's like, the broad strokes of this are really bad, but don't forget, like, nothing actually goes the way that we predict it's going to do in the real world. So, I mean, actually, it could be quite worse, or, maybe it would never get that bad. I really did like that, but like, I like Kelvin. My next question about seams is like, he is a very obvious seam to me. Because he's another plant in terms of providing information and solace and plot direction rather than like a real character.
And he's a bit too easy, right? It's like there's all this like capture the Dolmacher up in New Hampshire that happens that proves completely unnecessary. And then they just like knock on Kelvin's door and he pours them some Cran-Razz and they get down to business.
Yeah, that, and it's just, that's one of the things that I did start noticing as I was reading this again for this, as I was kind of rereading the second half of the book. There's just so many moments where you're like, okay, this is here only to nudge the plot forward. Like this little section is here simply to push us into the next thing, a life of its own.
And it doesn't serve what was set up for this character or for this. To me, one of the examples of this I noticed is a very small little detail that bothered me from that section I read, which is who calls them and warns them that there's a bomb in the basement. And I was like, well, the obvious person to do that would be Dolmacher, because we know that Dolmacher's not evil. He's kind of dumb. He's smart, but he's kind of dumb, and that maybe he would do it. But then the next message is Dolmacher. So we're like, well, that wasn't Dolmacher. So who could have done it? Well, maybe it was Roscommon, who was like, I'm blowing this thing up, but I don't want to actually kill anybody. So I'm going to tell them that there's a big bomb, get out. And so then we learn towards the very end in a strange scene that it's Gomez, the security guy. And it's just one of the most throwaway and plausible scenes of the entire book, because ST comes up to Gomez and he sort of pieced it together. Maybe he recognized his voice and he's like, thanks for the warning. And Gomez is like, ST's like, they must have been paying you some pretty good money. And he's like, nah, it's not the money. I just was pissed at you for getting me fired. But I didn't want you to die.
Yeah, you cost me a job, man.
And then ST's like, I got to talk about some stuff with these other people, and I don't want you to hear it, because you're a rat. And he's like, all right, I'll get out of here. See you later. And you're like, okay, so wait. So ST's basically like, you sold me out and blew up my house, and I know it, but thanks for the warning. And the other guy's like, yeah, I did that because I was pissed at you for costing me a job. Even though you got me another better job that I've actually really been enjoying by all accounts. But I guess we're just going to kind of forgive each other. But I understand that you don't want to be my friend because I kind of blew up your house a little bit. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It just doesn't feel like how humans behave at all. Yeah.
This book becomes like, like my reason for alluding to Die Hard earlier was intentional, because like this really, the end of this book feels like some of the later Die Hards where you're just like, oh my God. Like, this is like somebody needs to get a hold of this.
I honestly, I've watched the first one, which is a perfect movie.
Stop there.
Yeah, I watched a little bit of the second one. I'm like, I can tell this is just not going to be as. To me, it's just like, oh, they're just basically taking a movie and stylistically making it similar, and then they're going to give you moments that remind you of the first movie because Bruce Willis is going to say similar things or kill people in similar ways. And
it is the worst. It is like the symptom that is plaguing, like American culture.
Fan service. It was fan service before there was fan service.
Yeah,
right.
I know.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. But
yeah.
But readers, listeners, we head on into our trivia segment here. So, Jesse.
Yes.
Sangamon is a very weird name.
Yes.
And so my question to you is, do you have any guesses or ideas about the provenance of the name Sangamon?
Well, one thing I was going to point out is that there should be a Sangamon and Taylor intersection in Chicago, not far from my house. Except for that doesn't exist anymore because it was kind of bulldozed to make way for Little Italy in Chicago. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I guess Sangamon is an earlier term. I always thought Sangamon was an early term that was used as a synonym for chief as the Europeans encountered native tribes in the Northeast. But I may be confusing Sagamon and Sangamon. So I think maybe that's Sagamon instead of Sangamon. My best guess is it's just kind of an old waspy name that they named streets after and in certain places, and that we're meant to understand that Sangamon might be kind of from an old Boston Brahmin type family, even though he's kind of a black sheep type.
So you were the closest you were when you were at the Chicago street intersections. And there is a real there is a real insofar as anything is real. Sangamon is a county in Illinois. No, in here in the United States. In Illinois. But more interestingly, it is a geological era between the Illinoisan and the Wisconsin geological eras, which I did not know had been named. It's a Pleistocene era.
Yeah.
And Sangamon has sort of hung around as a county name, and then as you've experienced as a street name, which very often happens with place names and county names and whatnot.
Sure.
I don't know. But yeah, Sangamon is the third interglacial stage of the Pleistocene epoch in North America, after the Illinoisan glacial stage and before the Wisconsin.
Well, and both Illinois and Wisconsin, I believe, are names that are Frankification of indigenous names. I don't know if that's true for Sangamon or if that is in fact an old WASP name, but it would sort of fit with my idea that Sangamon or Sagamon was like an Abenaki or Algonquian language group word meaning something or another. And the people who were indigenous to Wisconsin and Illinois, which would include the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi, are part of the same language group as the people who are indigenous to New England, the Algonquian group, people who originally lived in Ottawa and then kind of spread out throughout the Midwest and the Northeast and the Southeast into Virginia and places like that too.
We need a ding and a I think as sound effects. I would give you a ding for that one because you really did. I think there's no way that you name a character that weirdly without having gone and done your homework. And it's the kind of thing that I really think, this is an eco thriller. I would give Stephenson the credit of being like, what is a real deep cut that I can name? I can throw this weird name that, like you said, has some grounding in kind of like indigenous people, because we do have a crossover with Jim Grandfather. But yeah, I would give that one to you. That was a real. That
might have been a bit of a pity ding or a gumption ding, or maybe gumption.
Gumption
maybe
ding.
I mean, I suspect there might be something else to it that we haven't put our finger on yet, too.
Probably, but I think that I could see that, yeah, in a book called Zodiac that is like very tied to the natural world, that I was like, okay, yeah, I could see a geologic age being something that Neal Stephenson is trying to say to us. I doubt it was a mistake or just a picked out of a hat.
Yeah. It's so possible, though, that Sangamon Taylor is named after whatever Sangamon that geologic age was named after, too, in the same way that the Illinoisan and Wisconsin eras were. The states, Illinois and Wisconsin, were not named after the geologic age. It was vice versa. So,
right, exactly. It's who's doing the wagging here.
Exactly,
right.
exactly. I
What's
also have a
yours?
name. I have a name-based quiz for you, and mine is
Okay.
multiple choice. So the bad guy chemical company in Buffalo, Niagara, in the book is called Boner, and I know that Stephenson enjoys puns and word plays, and he's doing a lot of winking references to real events. I did a little bit of research, and I think I figured out which actual chemical company he is alluding to. And this is a chemical company that did infamously dump some chemicals near Buffalo, Niagara in the 1970s and maybe the 1980s too. And it did make the news then. And the company also has a name that is likely to make a 14-year-old chortle. So is the name of that company A, the Hooker Chemical Company, B, Hancock and Sons Chemicals, or C, Johnson Steel Erectors, Inc.?
Okay, first of all, I want to give you great kudos if you generated the two false ones in here. And I hope you did. Because they're great, especially the Johnson Steel Erectors. Let's see. So we got Hooker, Hancock, and Johnson Steel Erectors.
Hancock and Sons.
Hancock and Sons. I was really hoping that the culprit in question was going to be Kodak, who is also sort of in that upstate Buffalo area, and I'm sure is responsible for some chemical damage in that part of the world. I just can't shy away from it. I'm going to go with Johnson Steel Erectors.
I can't give you a ding. I have to give you a buzz for that. But you'll be happy to know that A, I did generate the two fake names on my own. However, even though I generated the fake name Johnson Steel Erectors, there is in fact a Johnson Steel Erectors in Alabama, which I think is the best. I will also, so the correct answer is the Hooker Chemical Company, which transmutes nicely into Boner. I will also say that all three of those names, after I wrote them, I discovered that they also have something in common. And as a bonus quiz, I think we should put it to the listener. So, listener, if you think you know what Hooker Chemical Company, Hancock and Sons Chemicals, and Johnson Steel Erectors, if you think you know what those three names have in common, apart from making a 14-year-old chortle, go ahead and email me at jpd@uppermiddlebrow.com. We'll read your name on the podcast, and if we ever have swag, you'll be first in line for some free swag.
JPD, will you ever read Neal Stephenson's eco-thriller Zodiac again before you die?
I doubt it. What about you?
Yeah, I'm very happy for the chance to have read it again.
Yeah.
And to just kind of like buff up my knowledge of early Stephenson. But there's too many other flawed books to read before I would read this particular flawed book again.
I agree with that. You asked me the definition of upper middle brow last time, and we had some discussion about it. And one of the things I was thinking about in terms of my own definition, I've said accessible and high craft, but I think that for me, for something to be upper middle brow, it has to pull me along. I have to look forward to reading it, and I have to really admire the craft of the writing and the plotting and the characters and stuff like that. This one does pull me along. I wasn't bored while I was reading it, but it's sort of like many, many moments are just purely pleasurable on their own. It just doesn't hang together super well. Even though I think probably there was a lot of prodigious effort on Stephenson's part to make the plot hang together, that just all the various, fasteners he uses, they're just not very elegant fasteners. There are certainly moments of high craft, and there are moments that are worthy of Snow Crash and Cryptonomicon and Anathem. The talent is there, and it just does not achieve high craft, I think, throughout.
I agree. So now that we're leaving the shores of Zodiac behind, tell us what our listeners can expect next.
Well, as part of our, improvised theme on early Stephenson, we're going to leapfrog Snow Crash and go to the Diamond Age. What did it come out in, 94, 95, something like that?
I think it's 94, 95. It's about, he's on a pretty regular run of a book every 2.5 years from here on out, which is amazing.
If anything, he actually kind of speeds up as the books get longer.
It's insane. It's really quite remarkable.
There are more prolific writers. I don't know if there's a more prolific writer who writes better books.
I think you're right. I think he does. Yeah, that's one thing we'll definitely say about him is the word count and the average word quality is probably higher than anybody else that I can think of.
Absolutely.
So, listeners, thank you so much for listening. We really love it and we appreciate it. Please give us a 5-star rating on whatever podcast app you listen on. That really helps other people find the show. If you don't want to give us a 5-star rating, please email us at jpd@uppermiddlebrow.com or Bagg, BAGG, @uppermiddlebrow.com, and give us a review. If you leave us a 5-star rating and review, we promise we will read it on the air for about the first 100 or so, if we ever get up to that level of listening. JPD, anything else you want to say before we sign out?
No, but if you want to hang on, I'll tell you what those 3 names have in common.
Listeners, don't you want access to the secret vault?
You'll just have to guess yourself or keep listening till some smart reader puts it together and sends us an email. Thank you, Chris Bagg. Thank you, listener. Farewell.
Good night. Zodiac 2 outro script. Take 1. Hey listeners, Chris here. I'm at the top of a climb out in the Mount Hood National Forest called Screamer. Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes, creators and hosts. Music from Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. You can learn more about us at uppermiddlebrow.com. And if you think you know the answer to Jesse's question about what the fake business names in his trivia question have in common, write hello@uppermiddlebrow.com. Thanks for listening.